Again, Khogali, Conservative councillor for Strathern, and joining him, Jim Dale, meteorologist and author. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning. How are you?
Really good to see you. Shall we start with this big story this morning? And I mentioned it this morning, Jim, about the 20 billion black hole. Then we have the budget, all the stuff that I said, and then we're talking about giving 18 billion to the Chagos Islands. Now we're going to give trillions of pounds, or maybe in terms of reparations. The previous Conservative government said we are not going. This is the front page of the Daily Telegraph. The previous Conservative government said we are not talking about reparations in the slightest, and now Lammy is opening the door to that. And of course, Barbados wants a significant sum of money. What was it? 3.9 trillion. The Caribbean or former Caribbean colonies, they value the reparation bill at 18 trillion pounds. Where do you stand?
It won't be happening. It won't be happening because we haven't got that sort of money. And even if we did, I don't think it would be going in that direction necessarily. That isn't that there isn't a claim of sorts in terms of what happened in the past. I think we can all agree that some of the things that went on a few hundred years ago weren't the right thing to do, and these people have been left adrift, but they've been left adrift too long, and sometimes you have to close the book. You have to say, you know, enough is enough, and we can't rewrite the past. We've all moved on from that. We have to do it in different ways, and we do that in different ways throughout the world in terms of giving aid to some of our former colonies, etc., and present colonies, in terms of them being able to get through poverty and or climate change and or other aspects. So you know, I think we have to get real. It's a Telegraph story. I'm used to the Telegraph stories throwing grenades, and that's what they've done in this case.
Just before you jump in, Noah, you say a grenade. Let me just show you a clip of David Lammy. This is in 2020. This is what he said about reparations back in 2020.
I'm afraid, as Caribbean people, we are not going to forget our history. We don't just want to hear an apology, we want reparation.
Noah.
It's not going to happen. It's a weird policy focus now when they're floundering so much. And I'm also slightly concerned, given Labour's ability to negotiate or not negotiate over the Chagos, that whatever number that is demanded of David Lammy when he walks into the negotiation room, he's going to haggle them down to double the amount. And they also get Wales.
I mean, it's interesting here that David Lammy, on record saying we need reparations, he also says he's not British, he's Caribbean. David Lammy also not very good, one would say, with his past record of keeping everyone sweet. What did he call Trump? A neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath.
And look, this is part of the challenge for this Labour government now, is that they said a lot in opposition that they're having to roll back on, whether that's oil fields, whether that's Heathrow, which we'll talk about later, whether it's reparations. And the reality of being in government is very different to the reality of being in opposition and just being able to say what you want.
I think what you've seen there is David Lammy speaking from the heart, and then once you get into government...
What, in 2020,
and once you get into government, things change, and you've got to think with your mind, and you're in a different position. So as an opposition, you kind of oppose, and you put up the flags and you put up the banners, and you do it in that way. And that's exactly what's happening now with say Reform UK. They're doing very similar shouting from the rooftops, etc. So if they ever got into government, which I doubt very much, but if they ever did, Reform UK leading in the polls. I think we're going to talk about the polls at a certain point. You know, the position will change. I already noticed, by the way, that because I had a lot of conversations with Nigel Farage, debates with Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, etc., in the past about climate change, that now they're kind of running away from it. Why?
What do you mean running away from it?
Well, not wishing to debate. Not wishing to. Have you heard since Richard Tice was on the BBC talking about volcanoes being the reason for for climate change, modern day climate change? You know, from that position to what we've now seen in LA, in Valencia, it's kind of the events are overtaking them. Events are overtaking them.
I'm not sure that's true. Do you want to just answer that? You've taken me down a rabbit hole that I don't necessarily want to be down, but
I kind of lost what the question was.
Well, no, so Jim was just basically saying that Reform UK, Richard Tyson,
Yeah.
stepped away from net zero. I mean, it's very clear what Reform's policy, which is ditch net zero.
Yeah, look, I think the
denial.
reality of our energy policy, it needs a significant amount of capital investment. We need to diversify our energy production, and we need to be realistic about.
Okay. Well, in which case, answer me this. So, Mad Ed Miliband, this is his latest crazy scheme. He's now going to announce billions in subsidies for wood-burning power plants. What? Hang on a minute. I thought 1 minute you want net zero, then you're going to have windmills everywhere. Now you're going to burn wood like cavemen.
This is part of the problem with what is almost an accountancy trick with some of our energy production, where we pretend that energy imports essentially aren't as bad because we've not got the oil field, and that's incredibly counterproductive. We need significant investment in nuclear, especially in SMRs, because that
which
is
happening.
Hopefully the future. Yeah, which is happening. Which is one.
But we also think, Jim, I think they're going to approve Rosebank. I think.
Well, we will see.
So if
I
they
wouldn't
do that-
necessarily be in favour of this.
No, I know you wouldn't. But Noah's point is valid, which is I don't see an overall concerted energy strategy. It feels to me it's cobble it together.
It feels to me, and it is, a transition from where we were, the oil, the coal. Coal's gone. I mean, so that's your first step. Coal has gone,
yeah. But
which
what
is a
about
great
gas?
thing. Gas hasn't gone. Why hasn't it gone? Because we still need it at this moment in time. We still need oil, but it's a transition. It always will be, and it always was going to be.
I don't think anyone disagrees with that.
Yeah, but if you look at green energy, that's actually moving on a lot.
Why are we lumbering people with massive energy bills? Surely in a transition, I would get everything up and running. Noah's SMRs, I'd have them up and running. I'd have everything ready to go before you. I wouldn't clobber people.
Where do you think the cost of those energy bills have come from? They've come from essentially natural gas being
rubbish,
really high in the market. Have a look at the commodity prices.
Rubbish.
Have a
Jim.
look at them.
Rubbish.
One of the biggest blockers at this stage is grid capacity, and the grid just isn't set up to be able to handle.
It will take time.
Look,
it will take
takes
time.
a lot of time and a lot of investment.
Nobody wants a world. I say nobody because I fought people about ULEZ as well, stood in the middle of London talking to opposition. ULEZ is now in, pollution has gone down. It will be the same with renewables. We want a green
no
world.
difference in health outcomes. Let me just throw that at you in terms of your unit.
I think that's yet to be seen.
I have to go to a break, Jim.
Okay.
Just stay where you are. Noah and Jim will be back after this break.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. 8:43, Saturday, February the 8th. We're in the middle of Head to Head. I'm joined by Noah Khogali and also Jim Dale this morning. Should we talk, Noah, if we may, about, obviously there's an enormous amount of turbulence going on, but this is fascinating. Let me just show you this. This is Labour's latest attack line on Reform UK. The most interesting thing, and if we can show you this is about them saying how many people they have deported. Now, what do you notice about this, Noah? The fact is, there's no Labour branding on it. So they're saying they are hitting a 5-year high in migrant removals. No Labour branding, firstly. Secondly, I don't think they can do this, but they've done it in a Pantone colour, which is very similar, if not the same, as another political party, i.e. Reform UK.
Is this what their secret emergency cabinet meeting was about the other day? And then they've just sat there and done this on Canva or something? Look, ultimately, is it going to turn the tide of the way that people are feeling about the Labour government? No. Is it going to partially, quell some people's concerns that they're not doing anything on illegal migration? Perhaps. But I think the biggest issue that they have to tackle is that the people that are most concerned about this are concerned because they're seeing it in their communities. And if Labour can't make them feel like something's changing in those communities, then they won't get anywhere. It doesn't matter what the reality is. This is mostly a perception game for Labour at this stage.
What does it say, Jim, when you don't put the logo of your party on it, when you have an advertorial?
It says the boxing clever. What
You
they're
think
doing,
that's clever?
I do think it's clever.
Hang on a minute, isn't it passing off?
Remember, we're not in election time at this moment in time, so you're entitled to put out what you want. Now, what they're doing, Reform have been throwing bricks, if you like, big bricks, and they're aiming at, generally speaking, people who are, I use the word advisedly, not necessarily overly educated. In other words, lower echelons. And what Labour are doing is throwing bricks back. In other words, doing the same kind of trick, if you like. Call it that. Call it a game. Call it a war. Call it what you like. But they're fighting fire and fire with fire. So in other words, they're doing the exact type of advertisement as Reform have been doing against the Labour government.
Can I just double check?
That's what's saying.
Did I hear you correctly? Are you basically saying that people voting for Reform or backing Reform aren't very bright?
I'm not saying that. There's polls out that say that, actually. I'm not saying it. I'm saying I'm following the polls that actually say that the majority, the people, the education value in this country in terms of the top and the bottom, the majority at the bottom follow Reform. And that's not me saying it, that's a national
just
poll.
Just because someone doesn't have a degree doesn't mean that they're not capable of independent political.
I'm not saying that. Yeah.
But I want to hear from you, because I also would then, the counter argument is, these are the people who work really hard, who struggle to put food on the table. They're sick and tired of what's happening in this country, and maybe that's why they're voting, is because they want change.
Yeah, that's the same rhetoric. Look, during the Brexit referendum, I heard people make a similar argument. I was very young at the time, but it left an impression on me. Yeah, just get your man in there. But it was the same argument that people made. And just because you don't have a degree doesn't mean that you are, not capable of objective political thought or thinking through policy issues. Those two things are not the same, and it's important that we differentiate.
Let me just show you the latest polls, if I can. If you have just joined us, it's 8:45 now. Let's look at the first poll. This is Find Out Now, and it is pretty seismic what we have seen. So this is the poll that shows that out in front for the very first time, 29% is Reform UK, up 2 points. Labour on 25 points. Conservatives on 18, down 3 points. Interestingly, Labour's gone up 2 points, which I find absolutely extraordinary. Lib Dems on 13%, Greens on 10. We'll bring you that poll, hopefully, as soon as we can. That is the first poll. We've then got a second poll as well, which is from YouGov, which pretty much says the same. What's going on, Noah?
I think this is what you tend to see in the early years.
There we go. There's YouGovs for you. Sorry. So Reform. I mean, this is pretty interesting. 25 for Reform. You can read it for yourselves, but Noah.
Look, I don't think this is something that will last through to the next election.
You hope.
Yeah, I've said this to you before. I don't have a huge amount of faith that Nigel Farage is capable of holding a party together for that long and running a proper election campaign, whilst also growing the size of a party that much. It's something that requires not the skills that Nigel Farage has become famous on. You have to have a policy platform, and that's not something that's been his expertise. Fundamentally, He is good at
Ni-
leading populist movements. Not
Nigel
governments.
Farage is not head of the policy unit, and there are people there. And Zia
Yes.
Youssef is a strategic businessman.
But
setting
people
up the
know Nigel
branches.
Farage.
Sure.
He's the face. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I've heard you criticise Kevin Badenoch a lot. That doesn't mean that CCHQ
No, sure.
don't exist. It's
Nigel Farage, until the Reform Party, until they adopted Nigel Farage as the leader during the election campaign, were nowhere until they did so.
Well, that's not true.
So really,
that's not true, because when
true.
I was there with Richard Tyson, we were on 2%. We grew it to about 7-8%. When Nigel came on, it then grew exponentially.
7-8% isn't going to get you anywhere in politics.
No, indeed. But also, Reform UK is a very young party.
But as Noah's already said, this is very early days. I mean, come back in 4 years, things tend to change. You've got the one thing you will say is 6 months of a Labour government is not enough to turn around the crash that happened under Truss and Johnson before. So it's going to take time, and I think people are aware of that. Yes, they're impatient. Yes, things are going on. It's not easy decisions that are being made at this moment in time. I think you've got to give the opportunity for them to spell out what they're doing, to actually make it.
What are they doing?
I think they're going through difficult times at this moment in time, but I think they're going in the right direction with several areas.
Tax?
Potentially, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the farmers, absolutely. In terms of
Destroying
the private
farms?
schools, it's not going to destroy farms. No, it's
destroying
not.
farms, destroying private schools, destroying aspiration, massive taxation.
All they're doing there is bringing the farmers into what everybody else has got to do. It's the same. In other words, making it neutral across the board.
Look, Labour's policy platform has been abysmal so far. They've managed to somehow annoy lots of the Labour base. I appreciate you don't seem to be annoyed, but they're annoying a lot of the Labour base as well as the rest of the country. And I'm not entirely sure who is supposedly actually really happy with this policy platform, especially when you look at something like the taxation on private schools. That is quite obviously an attack on aspiration, and also an attack on lots of those special needs young people that were relying on private schools because, state schools just couldn't provide the support they needed. Those are the people that are being attacked by this Labour government.
OK, pause, gentlemen. We'll continue after this break.
But the thing that I find troubling, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kevin, is that, when the police were initially asked about this, they said, we're not going to investigate it because nobody's complained. And then, a day later, when obviously people did complain, they said, we're not going to investigate it because apparently it's out of time. Well, why didn't they just say that the first time around?
Well, I think it's really important that everybody's treated equally before the law.
Yeah.
And we saw this action taken against certain individuals within our party, Boris and others, which people will have different views upon.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. We're in the middle of Head to Head. This is quite interesting. Rachel Reeves, of course, there's this thing where Rachel Reeves has said, actually, the economy trumps net zero, and she has made this very clear repeatedly. Rachel Reeves has told Ed Miliband she's prepared to move further and faster to promote growth with projects like the third runway at Heathrow. They had this 6-hour away day, God, that sounds thrilling, on Friday, and now the net zero secretary, Ed Miliband, seems to have backtracked. He wasn't there when they made the announcement about the third runway, but no, he now says, it's collective responsibility. I back a third runway at Heathrow.
Do you know what it feels like? You know when children apologise and they walk up to you and they go, oh yeah, my mum and dad told me to say sorry? And you know it's not genuine, but they've had to say it in public anyway.
Well, to be fair to him, he did say, apparently, he was in that meeting and showed displeasure about it, but maybe he's right. Maybe it is collective responsibility.
No, well, yeah, I quite like that we've gone back to a traditional cabinet rules where everyone kind of has to get on the same page. But it does make me question how long he'll last, because it's a pretty big backtrack from him on his previous position. And I've said since the beginning that Ed Miliband as Desmond Secretary made sense at the start, but I don't know about the long-term future of it, because he does seem to be quite far from the objectives, if not the actions, of this government on a number of levels.
Something you said, Jim, earlier, I think most people do want a cleaner environment, right? But it's about the timeline. I'm listening to Boris Johnson's book Unleashed at the moment. They had this arbitrary number, and 2030 seems pretty arbitrary. But surely I go back to this thing where you want to build the SMRs, get them up and running first. Keir Starmer's changed his position on SMRs as well. You've got Ed Miliband saying let's burn wood. You've then got windmills and great big pylons going across East Anglia, where I live, which people are very unhappy about. On top of that, we've now got this change from Miliband in terms of what they're doing. Is there a cohesive strategy behind this?
Well, you mentioned economic and net zero, or let's just say climate change, in other words, doing progressive things towards that. I actually disagree, because I think net zero, I think that what you're seeing from LA to Valencia to floods in Thailand to record temperatures going off at this moment in time to the record January 1.7 degrees globally, above the IPCC level, going in one direction only, means that in the end, climate is going to overtake economics. It will start to impact massively, and that's not me speaking. That's Deloitte.
Even if okay, so I'll take that point. But we contribute 1% of global emissions, right? Meanwhile, those economies like China, like India, building coal-fired power stations. So why are we doing this and making our citizens poorer?
Well, they're not building them; they're going to reduce them. And you're right at this moment in time. Yeah, look, China, the USA. India to a degree as well. All three of them are in the wrong place. Well, having said that, China is now heading both solar and wind power by a long way.
They're also building traditional power stations as well.
But they know economically that is going to be prosperous for them.
Well, they're also building the parts for us to buy to install here.
Just to be really clear here, if you have a look at graphs of greenhouse gas emissions, look at China and compare it to the US. They are not the same thing at all. And we need to be really clear about that. The US greenhouse gas emissions are coming down and China's have not been. And we need to be very, very careful about stunting our own economic growth, because ultimately it's that's going to be the thing that provides the innovations, the technological advancements that get us out of this mess. We all want to get out of it.
But we don't have to get out of it by creating more of a mess in terms of the environment and putting more fossil fuel emissions into the air. We need to start pulling away.
But
well,
last
we're not
weekend,
doing it.
the Chinese
We're not
are
doing
doing
it. The Chinese are going in the right direction.
What up?
No,
Look at a graph of greenhouse gas
You're
emissions.
missing my point. It's still a evolution. It's
no,
not a
no,
revolution.
I totally. But surely we need to make it affordable for people to adopt that transition. What I'm seeing is elderly people at home who've turned the heating off because they're too frightened to use it because the bills are massive.
Well, that's the winter allowance cut, isn't it? That's where it was. My old mum's in that position, to be honest with you. But you know, the certain thing. I think it's. I say this advisedly. I think it's exaggerated. I think it's pushed by the opposition in terms of saying that this is the worst thing that's ever happened. It's not the worst thing. People can do things in their own home to keep themselves warm, etc. You know, it is a case of managing that to a degree, even in a cold winter.
So my bill last month was £400. I don't even have heating on that. That's electricity.
Technological innovation is going to be what's in the long term going to bring those bills down, and the capital investment that's needed in the short term to make sure that the grid is doing it right.
Yeah.
But the crux here is we can't sit on our laurels, not invest and not innovate. That's going to be the thing that saves us. That's what we need to focus on.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Noah Khogali, Conservative Councillor for Strathern, and Jim Dale, meteorologist.